I'm Gilmore Tamny. This is House Calls with Gilmore Tamny for non-event. I'm with Forbes Graham.
Howdy.
So let's see. My first question is, I see that you're from Maryland.
hmm
I was curious how long you've been involved in the experimental scene in Boston.
I want to say since late 2003, something like that.
Okay.
Because when I first left Maryland, I first moved to Providence, Rhode Island, and I won't get into the whole story, but I ended up seeing Rakib Hassan play at was it, I forget, in 2003. I don't know if it was Zeitgeist. It might have been Zeitgeist then. It's Lily Pad now.
Okay.
But I saw him play there, and I met him, and he said, "Well, what do you play?" And so then he recruited me into his band,
Wow.
and that's how I met a lot of people. So met like Glennis Lohman, Eric Zinman, Sid Smart, Luther Gray, Jim Hobbs, like a lot of people from playing with Rakib, because a lot of people were in his band at certain points. Uh, and kind of from there, it's so fuzzy because it was so long ago. But I played with Jim a good deal. I played with Dennis Warren uh, a good deal. Uh, and then I know that I see this again. It's like details get fuzzy, so that because that's over 15 years. Um, but I know that I made friends with Kevin Frenette probably around 2005, 2006, and I was played with him and with Pandalise, and it's just a whole bunch of people. And there was also, um, again, I'm the exact year is not super there in my mind, but my old bandmate in KO, Ryan McGuire, was he was friends with Josh Jefferson,
Oh,
and then
sure.
Josh Jefferson was friends with Andrew Eisenberg, and so and they were friends with Ricardo, who at the time lived at the Piano Factory, and he organized a lot of uh, musicians and meetings of musicians. So he had this thing of cross pollination, or probably was cross pollinization is probably the right, I think, what it was, where he just had a lot of different improvisers from a lot of different areas of the scene and a lot of the different sub scenes. And so a lot of people got to meet and play that way as well. Um, and I knew of people before I had come. So like, because I had met Greg Kelly and Mike Bullock in Baltimore around,
Yeah.
guessing 2001 or 2002. So once I got here, I mean, I knew some people, or at least I knew who I wanted to hear and that sort of thing.
It's funny as you're talking, the way you talk about some of the people you've played with almost reminds me of how people talk about different countries they visited. You know, like I'm sure there's a very specific feeling with each of those people, and you know what.
That's a good point. Um, no, you're right. I think because especially with Rakib, he not only introduced me to all these people, and you could say, well, that would have happened anyway. Who knows? But like, I owe him a great debt that unfortunately I never, since he passed away, I can't repay, and kind of failed to repay him by failing to visit him enough when he was ill, towards the end of his life. Um, but you know, there's definitely a certain emotion or feeling from that, and gratitude. He also helped me get housing even when I moved to Cambridge from Rhode Island. It's not always easy to find housing or find the housing you would like to be in, and he
Sure.
helped me get housing because I lived with Glennis, his brother. Um, and then Jim also kind of really, um, I don't know, sort of did me a solid by letting me play with fully celebrated orchestra for a while, to the point where I look back now and I'm like, yeah, I kind of took that for granted. That was stupid. I mean, at the time, I was like, I definitely realized that I was doing something that was worthwhile, but don't think that I necessarily invested as much time into it as I should have, as far as working all the tunes and different things. But I'd say, and I mean, I think when you've known, not that, I'm hanging out with people all the time or whatever, but, when you've known people for a certain amount of time and you accumulate certain experiences with them over time. So even if, it's like you don't go shoot pool every Friday or something, you still kind of like share life's experiences, ups and downs over the years, and grow a certain relationships with people through music.
I once heard someone say there's nothing like shared danger to bond people. And I think music, especially if you're performing live, there is an element, danger, not maybe physical danger, but, you know,
I mean, I think in to some extent there's something about conditions under which you're playing that, I'm gonna use this word, but I know it's the wrong word. Like, we sort of romanticize our conditions because, we don't make very much money. Not a lot of people come to the concerts and so on. We sort of romanticize those things even while we lament them, and there's a certain bonding of that, because it's like, why would you keep doing this year after year? It's pretty illogical. um, but I mean, at the same time, I sort of like to push, in some ways, back against that mentality, because it kind of plays into the individualistic thing a little bit. In a weird way, like, you would think, okay, we're this group who is under this certain thing, um, but for whatever reason, it always sort of feels like each person is their own person going against this thing. And what we need is the solidarity and community to try to ameliorate these things, even though it feels very impossible.
yes. And this may not exactly be to your point, but I feel like what people are giving up is very different. Like the range of, you know, how hard it is to give up what they're giving up, or what sort of resources they have or privileges they have. So
Yeah,
it's a different, it's a
that's
different,
true.
level of dedication and all these things. I mean, yes, I mean, there is an element of like, you would only do this if you love this, right? I mean, I feel
Yeah,
the way with writing. I do writing and
right.
know writers, and you would never seriously, why do that to yourself? It's like looking at yourself in the most unflattering mirror at the
Yeah,
mall.
I don't know how that's. Yeah,
I'm just saying there's some things that you would really only do them if you love them or have
yeah,
some weird psychological compression pushing you there,
yeah,
right? So I don't
yeah.
really think that's quite to your point, Forbes, but it's
It's a corollary. It's a corollary because, again, like, I don't want to romanticize that situation, but if yeah, why would you spend all this time working on music and then spend all this time organizing events and then so on for really, like, spiritual gain? I In a sense, I mean, obviously not everybody subscribes to that, but certainly something not exactly material.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, yeah. Is that what kind of, irritates you, or not irritates you, but just like where you're like, I don't know if we want to romanticize this. Like, what can you be more specific about what that seems sort of
I mean,
a
I think
misunderstanding?
you mentioned privilege, and I think there's something to that, only in the sense of, um, yeah, you could do something else. You know. Um,
Sure.
and,
Yeah.
and depending on your circumstances, you know, what you're going through to do whatever it is you're doing is very different from other people. So, you know, for some people, they're like it's everything and they sacrifice everything, and for other people, they don't sacrifice anything, and a lot of people try to make a balance in between somehow. And you know, different people have different levels of education and uh, just support and access to things, and so it really what people are you know kind of dealing with in order to kind of be creative person or is very different for each person and psychologically different because like I said, I'm making this whole spiel about well, why would anyone do this? But for some people, they wouldn't even think about that because why would they even care? They'd be like, yeah, I play shows. Like, they don't even, you know, it's not something worth their time to even ponder on. So everybody kind of comes at it from a different point of view. And I know when I was like, you know, granted, I was playing different music, but, you know, I was 18 or 19 or whatever. I could have cared less about, oh, there's 10 people. So like it just it like just didn't figure into my brain one bit.
Right.
It's like
I wonder, I'm trying to think of, did I care? I think I cared, but I didn't think anything else was going to happen. I mean, I went to a lot of hardcore shows when I was young, and it was like
right.
the idea that anybody would give a shit about anything you had to say was kind of a given that people didn't want to hear what you had to say. So
Yeah. That was what I was thinking of because when I was that age, that's what I was doing. And funnily enough, the thing that popped in my head was my old band played some shows with Dillinger Escape Plan way before they were popular. And we played in Baltimore, something like us, Dillinger Escape Plan, Botch, Jesuit, and some other, I forget who. And there was probably about 10 people there. And one of the guys from Jesuit was just, you know, furious. You know, and probably because he had some bills to pay. Whereas, like, I was on summer break. So, you know, I was on summer break from college. I did not have any bills to pay. I mean, and I was home. The show was in Baltimore. I didn't quit the job to go on tour. You know, whatever job I was working that summer, I was gonna go work it the next day. Definitely, you know, at that age, and in that music, I could have cared less. Like, it just didn't even cross my mind.
oh gosh darn it, it was some musician I saw a documentary about, and he was so mad that he didn't have more fans. But anyway, he was really huffy about it.
Yeah, I don't know what that is in our brain. I mean, I brought it up, so there must be something going on there, you know.
Do you feel like you can spot another trumpet player, like when you're at the grocery store or when you're talking to people?
No. Now there is a certain stereotypical trumpet player kind of thing.
Huh, okay.
However, like all stereotypes, not all trumpet players fit into it. So you
Like
definitely can't just spot them, number one. And then
lung capacity?
what'd you say?
Lung capacity?
No, it's a weird kind of alpha thing actually.
Oh, interesting. Please tell. Yeah.
It's hard to explain because it's not like I said, not all trumpet players have it. Um, and it's not like super alpha. It's not like this kind of knock you over alpha thing. But there's definitely a certain trumpet player who's sort of like it can be the jock of instruments sometimes.
Ha!
You can spot that, but you wouldn't be able to necessarily be like, "Oh, that's a trumpet player." You can't. It's not the one thing that will give away some if they have like the bruise on the mouth.
Ah, yep.
That does give away all trumpet players, or at least all brass players, but not all, not literally every single one, because I never have that. I don't put enough pressure on my mouth. I also have a mustache. You can't see my face
Right,
anyway.
right,
But even
right,
if
right.
I did, I've never had that. I have, as far as I can tell, I have never had that on my face because I just don't push that hard on the instrument. But yeah, you can spot. You can. That's the one thing you can spot a trumpet player by. maybe those alpha people are more the ones who were like, they knew they wanted to be professional musicians from a very young age. So they had more of an alpha mentality too.
Do you speak of yourself?
No,
Oh, no. Okay.
no. I mean, I wanted to be a musician from the age of 14.
Wow, I would have thought it was earlier because it seems like it's so intrinsic. Did you have a
No,
father thing first that you
it,
wanted to do?
I wanted to be like an electrical engineer, some kind of engineer.
Hmm. Like, did you design bridges or something when you were a
We
little
did
kid?
that in high school. Yeah, we did that in high school some, and I went to engineering summer school camp. They had this thing at Howard University, and it was like an engineering camp, and we learned about all the different types of engineering. Like I went to a nuclear power plant and looked
Boy.
down in the water. You could see these blue rods down in the water, and we learned about laminar flow. They showed us the formula for like if you turn on a spigot and you want to know the rate of the flow of some substance to come out of the spigot. Like I don't know if you had a jar of honey with a little tap on it, and you
Yeah.
wanted to know how fast the honey would come out when you open the tap. There's a formula for that. So
Oh, wow.
so we learned a bunch of stuff. But at that point, I was still kind of into engineering, but I wanted to be a musician. And
Mhm.
the thing though, I didn't have like I didn't quite have the level of utter total dedication um to be a professional musician. And I think in some ways, I mean, I didn't necessarily have the mentors to steer me in the right direction either. And between the two, it just didn't quite go down that way. But
Engineering, I immediately think of bridges, but electrical engineering is
it would be like circuits. Yeah, because
circuits. Okay.
Bridget's would be civil engineering, and the irony was when I was in college, I was terrible at electricity. I was terrible at electric lab because I studied audio technology, and you had to do electricity class or electronics, and I sucked so bad at it. So I definitely would have been more suited towards probably like civil engineering, but in some ways, I wouldn't have been suited towards any of them because like those you build stuff, and I'm not necessarily that great at that. So
Hmm.
I think I would have been better off. I mean, maybe I could. I mean, I work as a software engineer, scan more building. I mean, I guess like, if I'd formally studied that, that might have been okay. Um, I would have liked to have done mathematics, but yeah,
Well, any formula about will tell you how things coming out of spigots. I'm in. Like,
yeah,
like
yeah.
it's
I
fun.
wish I could remember that formula.
Well, I probably even if I mean for this, I probably would. It probably would not mean a lot to me. Obviously, if there's a lot of X's and
Yeah, there
symbols and
was there was a lot of weird little constants too, like little.
yeah, well, there's all that. I mean, math and music
Yeah.
are like cousins, siblings,
Hmm.
frenemies.
A
I
little of all of that, I
yeah.
would say. Yeah.
I was wondering about when you learn to read music. I used to,
Hmm.
in my mind, have a very clear distinction between what I would call like literate musicians and illiterate musicians, although that sounds awfully loaded now that I'm saying
Hmm.
that. But those who can read music and those who can't.
Hmm.
I think I don't feel that way as much. And I'm someone who doesn't. So obviously this is some personal baggage.
Yeah, yeah. Hmm.
Come out. Um, but playing guitar, just being like, I don't know what the fucking strings are, so take that.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, it served me well, I will say, because I think as a woman, I was very much like, everybody's gonna tell me I can't do this. I have to just like have
Right.
the most tude possible. And
Yeah.
then, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
However, I'm curious, it seems I'm imagining it's a very fluid thing for you now, where you just like you can open something up and it's like reading English.
Not 100%. And ironically, since we're talking about this, so I applied to Oberlin Conservatory. That was like the school I wanted to go to, and part of why I didn't get in was on the audition. I totally botched the sight reading.
Oh,
Um, and for whatever reason, like, but up to maybe like I had practiced ahead of time, but I guess I want to say maybe the last couple of weeks up to that audition, I had kind of neglected the sight reading, and I think it was a self-sabotage thing. Um,
yep.
in some ways, it was for the best because going to college in the middle of nowhere, Ohio, was really not going to be, I think, a winning formula for me. But there is an aspect of it because, like, even now I practice. Well, I don't practice sight reading as much as I practice transposition. Like, that's the thing I've been working more on because I have a method book um, for transposing. So you just work the book, and I'm still pretty close to the beginning as I've been for a long time. But lately, I was sort of like, yeah, if I worked on transposing more, I'd be more useful in certain situations. So, uh, it's definitely a skill, and yeah, there's some people. I want to say I forget what you have to do. Say again, like going back to say like the Navy band for sight reading, but it's pretty rigorous. So, um, it is a skill. Now, that being said, some people are better at it than others, and also, what's the word I'm looking for? Um, there's just a certain level at which you don't. There's a certain degree to which it's more or less useful. So, like, if you're playing gigs where you walk on the gig and play the gig, and there's no rehearsals, that's where well, you need sight reading for that. But I mean, just anything where you get rehearsal time versus where you don't, and
Mhm.
and there's sheet music that you have to do versus like, I guess if you got no rehearsal time and it was all by ear. If they handed you if someone handed you the CD and said learn these and the gig is next week, that's another skill set that
Right,
also doesn't, that doesn't involve reading music, but that's still like an acquired skill.
right. Like anything else. I think for me, the timing of it, like how fast you have to be able to read it for it to be useful. Like the amount of time you have to process it and then it comes out of your fingers seems.
It also that depends too because sometimes you have to memorize that in order to get the muscle memory to work in order to do it. So even if you're looking at it, it's more like a visual aid
Mhm.
versus really reading it. And so
Oh, for sure.
but yeah, I mean, there's definitely, I mean, there's a certain kind of encoding and decoding in all of those. And, in any system of notation involves that. And, even if, you mentioned guitar, I mean, there's guitar tab, and that's its own kind of system. And then, I've seen scores for a trumpet where they notate the valves
Huh.
that you're doing.
Wow.
So instead of the specific note, it's the valve combination. Um, so it's really any kind of, kind of, and I think, yes, yeah, I'd use the word notation, involves some kind of encoding and decoding at some level. And yeah, depending on your facility at it, I guess. And in a lot of ways, once you acquire that facility, you do tend to take it for granted and not really think about it as much. Just in somewhat in the same way as reading your native language, if you're able to do that, it's just
Mhm.
something that you kind of just do.
Yeah.
Um, when you see something that's not familiar to you, then that's when you're like, oh God, what? And that's the same thing, even in English, you see, you read something and someone, I can't come up with a thick word I don't know off the top of my head, but um, when you see those, you're like, you gotta say, should I just keep reading this even though I don't know what that means, or should I go find out what it means? I don't know.
Yeah.
I was reading something and a guy was talking about, you know, tuning systems from like second century China or something.
Well,
Um, so I mean, there's such a variety of ways to envision how we make sound and organize how we make sound
Mm.
and in such a great variety in the human experience of how that's done. It a lot of times we're scratching the surface of.
Mhm. Yes, I would. I am fairly Western North American, and it's been interesting how some stuff you just like you just cruise in, like
Mm-hmm.
pop
Mm-hmm.
music almost something you don't have a cultural like particular obviously no history with or
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah.
and then you're in it, and that's sort
Yeah.
of thrilling when that happens because it does feel like, oh, there is something universal, even if I
Yeah.
don't know it's a love song and I'm,
Right.
you know what I
Right.
mean?
Right. I have no idea what they're singing about. I don't know what it means. I I find aesthetic value in it and it sounds good. And yeah, when I was listening to the Tanzanian music yesterday, I was thinking about that because, Tanzania is on the east side of Africa,
Yep. Hmm.
and all my African ancestors are from the west, basically, as far as I know. And so those are pretty far away from each other. Um, and so, again, it was sort of a thing of, oh, yeah, yeah, they're all black and everything. But it's just, you still are kind of getting into this humanity thing. And this whole thing of, I have no idea what they're talking about. I don't know Swahili. I've never been to Tanzania, but this music is great.
Hmm.
And there is something, at least on some level, that's really joyful about that aspect of the human experience, that we can access through music and through sharing and learning about music. For me, anyway.
Sure, sure. I also feel like when I've met musicians, I went to this um, group that studies Romany culture, the
Mm-hmm.
uh, what sometimes erroneously referred to as gypsies.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So it was a million years ago, but I went and there was a gentleman from Macedonia and he did not speak any English or very,
Mm-hmm.
very little. And of course,
Mm-hmm.
we wound up being able to talk because he played in a Led Zeppelin cover band.
Oh, wow.
That was the way, like, I don't even know how we managed to get there.
Yeah.
I could tell he was pretty serious about it. And there was such a joy between us of this.
Yeah,
Like,
that's pretty cool.
it was very cool. But when I've met musicians in other places, there is a certain, I don't know if it's life experience or it's a little bit like a sense of humor, but there can be plenty of humorless musicians too. I
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what it is, but there is some sort of recognition, I
Yeah,
think.
I mean, maybe it's the communication aspect of music. I'm not 100% sure. Maybe it's this just the fact that you produce some kind of sound. Um,
Hmm.
because yeah, I wonder about that sometimes too, and that's something that I think about. Because this whole pandemic situation,
Oh yeah, I was going to ask you about, yeah.
it's really, obviously you don't, you're not traveling as much or I mean, I wasn't anyway, but I've been like, man, I want to travel or whatever. Obviously, I probably can't, but where would I go? And I'm like, well, I was sort of musing. I was like, I want to go to Mexico next, um, but I'm like, I don't know. Maybe I should try to, you know, get to St. Louis first. And some of my colleagues are, back playing in Europe and things like that. Um, and I've been watching all their daring do and whatnot. Um, and so, I do, there is some kind of thing about meeting others and kind of I don't know what it is, if you want to know the truth. Like, I think I probably haven't dwelled on it enough. I've just sort of felt it.
Hmm.
But there definitely is some kind of experience of performing that feels familiar across musicians.
So COVID, you can't play trumpet with the mask on.
Yeah.
So much of your work is with other people.
Mm-hmm.
So this must have been such a huge dent for you, right?
Uh, Somewhat. I mean, I kind of pivoted, but
Yeah.
uh,
How so?
I focused more on music composition, just writing pieces. Um, I really dedicated a lot of time to that side of things and tried to hone in on certain goals I wanted to accomplish in that area, which were mostly successful. But yes, there was, most of the time I was playing with other people. Um, a good deal of that too is I tend not to organize concerts.
Ah,
I had a period where I did, but I stopped. And so if people ask me, then I take the gig, or unless I can't, but like before the pandemic, if you saw my name on a show, somebody asked me to play it.
uh-huh.
And that was the only reason I was there. So, um, so yeah, I kind of that kind of put a dent in things. Although, last summer as well as this summer, there were outdoor gigs. So there were some of those. Although last summer it was, we didn't, obviously there was no vaccines. We didn't know as much about anything. They felt more frightening. I think I only did last summer. I played one concert, and I think I met up with one per. No, I played two concerts, and I met up with one person to play.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, they were a little bit like, what the heck, and I remember at one of them, a dude, um, he was a little inebriated and he came up to talk to me, and I was like, you need to back up. And I never do that to people. I was just like, yo, you need to back up. Um,
Well,
so yeah, and then this summer, Alex Lemsky has been actually probably since the spring. He's been organizing a lot of events, and I've played a number of those. So there's still been stuff, but yeah, there's just not as much. And I'm doing my first indoor thing at the end of August.
hmm.
Be playing with Sid Smart and Jacob William in Somerville. Uh, so yeah, it definitely hit. It put a dent, but it really, I mean, it was like I had to deal with family and all these other things. So that didn't really affect me too much. If you want to know the truth, like I think maybe at first because it was like, oh, this is another thing I can't do. Um, but I don't think it really like knocked me on my butt per se.
Sounds like you rechanneled it into stuff you could do, right? I mean, that's yeah.
By and large, that's what happened. I just channeled it into things I could do and kind of coped. And I think in the beginning of the pandemic, for me, it was like, okay, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And I really like just went all out on a whole lot of different things. And then now I'd say since I don't know, maybe April or May, like my tank is definitely run out.
Uh-huh.
And I mean I'm still getting a decent amount of stuff done, of course. I am still being very creative overall. I'm feeling really good about that. And I'm still able to kind of deal with others in the right way, or what I think is the right way. So like a lot of that is good. Part of me is like it's over, but it's not over. For me, it's sort of like, so where am I now? That's kind of the phase I'm at now. And it's like in the next couple of months is how closer to quote unquote this is over am I getting? But then the other thing too is like I'll never be the same. So it's just never, like all these things I've been through this last year and a half, I'll just never be the same ever again. And therefore, as a result, it's just like I just have to kind of persevere in whatever way I can as time goes on.
Hmm. I would imagine having kids is like in COVID. being those concerns and having them home. I forget, your kids are pretty young, aren't they?
My kids are young. My oldest son is 8.
Okay.
And me and him were talking about this earlier today because I took him down to the Barnes and Nobles to get him a book. We're getting, this is the thing, like some of these things are coming back. So like before COVID, I used to take him to Barnes and Noble every Sunday,
Oh, nice.
get him a book. And then we stopped doing that. And like in the last couple of weeks, we started bringing it back of like, okay, every Sunday I'll take you, maybe like once a month you can get a video game. The rest of the time you're going to get a book. And
Yep.
so, he's into Big Nate right now. Big Nate's a kid and he's just kind of a goof, you know. Um I don't know what I compare him to. He's like a Charlie Brown. You know what? He's like a modern day Charlie Brown. But Charlie Brown was, you had a lot of pathos for Charlie Brown because ultimately Charlie Brown really had like a heart of gold. Uh Big Nate does not. He's just a schmuck. But like he's still an adorable schmuck. So in his own way. But Charlie Brown was not a schmuck. Charlie Brown was a good guy. All the way through. Anyway, but Silas and I, my son, we were discussing this very thing. And it's like, yeah, I think if I didn't have children, I think I'd still be thinking, okay, well, I don't want to spread this. I want to try to do my bit. But it would be not as big a deal because it's like I got vaccinated. So like that's about the best I can do. So let's go, party on, let's go. And because of the kids, I definitely curtail, like there's things that I would do if I didn't have kids.
Mhm.
I'm still not doing, or that like I'm
Sure.
doing very tentatively. I'm like, part of me is like, I don't know if I should be doing that, so it's definitely a different thing when you're in any situation where there's somebody who can't get the vaccine, or you're like thinking maybe they would, if they got this, it could hurt them.
Mhm.
And they're saying, well, the kids can't get it and so on. I had this conversation with Silas where I was trying to say to him, I was like, I know that I'm being kind of irrational. And where I kind of came down was I said, okay, I'm being irrational, but all the people who are just like, let's go back to normal, they're being irrational. So like, I don't want to listen to them because they're already on some BS, even though they might be right about certain things. And so in my mind, I guess what I want to do is keep an open mind, but it's also like, sorry, I just can't fully. It's just like there's just too much that's happened. I'm
Mhm.
I'm human too, and I'm not capable necessarily of just going full rational all the time. I have to do that enough. So
Right. I know that's sort of my constant prayer. Please let me have the resources to live in alignment with reality. And
yeah,
it kind of comes and goes, but
yeah,
rationality is like you can have a high bar, but nobody can be
yeah,
rational
yeah,
all the time. I really like the way you put that. That's
yeah.
It's nice that you can share that with your son. That is amazing. That's
Well,
like,
yeah, yeah.
uh,
We just, first of all, granted, I have 3 kids, so it's like, I, you that affects your ability to bond with any of them because they all need time.
mhm,
But I'm an only child, so me and my dad, we had those type of conversations. Well, we definitely have real conversations as soon as he felt like I could grasp anything that he had to say.
mhm,
So I kind of just passed that on with him. I talked to him pretty much at the level, there's certain things we don't really talk about yet because he is 8,
sure.
um, but yeah, I talked to him about whatever, and I hate, it's funny. I tell him this. I tell people, my dad would say, "Oh, I learned a lot from you," and I always was like, how's a grown up supposed to learn from a kid? But it's true. When you have kids, you do learn from them.
I was going to ask you if your kids had any aesthetic influence on your music. like things they were into or noises they made or ways.
No, but I'm wondering if if that might change,
Hmm.
because again, going back to he makes levels in Geometry Dash, which is this it's this game. So he makes his own levels in it. And so we were talking about that today too. And I said, well, you could think about Geometry Dash in like the way that a composer thinks about music. And he wasn't really interested in that. And I was sort of like throwing out, I was like, well, what do you think about drawing your levels out on paper? And he was basically like, no. But like he makes all these levels, and I've started to, in some ways, think about how he's doing that and what he's doing. So I think, at least on some tangential level, it will be leaking in the something close to the near future. There'll be some, I'm not gonna say Geometry Dash music, but more like seeing how he's building things in this platform. And I'll probably be starting to think about how I build things, and maybe use either his approaches or just things I see in that game, and start to think about it from that point of view.
I guess you could say that family is a little bit like, you know, maybe not experimental music, but like you know what I mean? Like someone's making a sandwich and
Mhm.
you know what I mean? Someone,
Yeah. You have this kind of collection of activities
yeah,
and sites, in sites where sounds occur, and they may or may not relate to each other in any given time, or right, if you there's certain coordinations, and it's like, if you're getting the Cheerios, then you got to get the orange juice, and then you're trying to cook the oatmeal, and some of it's going at the same time, and you're trying to coordinate these certain things, and you're trying to communicate that to certain people. Okay, you got to wait, oatmeal's not ready yet. Okay, the oatmeal's done, but it's got to cool off. Like, there's all these different processes that go into it, and then everybody kind of interacts with them a little bit differently. And and these things happen in a certain space. So it's like there's certain there's certain things where I guess I could see a kind of, I don't want to say corollary, but it's more like I could see a comparison, a parallel. Although I wouldn't go so far as to say it's the same thing or they're that closely related. But especially once when you have more than one, you're juggling. That's the other thing. You do a lot of juggling. You just get used to that. I have three. Yeah, I have three.
it's a, you know, it's a lot of,
Yeah, and my wife obviously does a lot of juggling because she heavily is involved in childcare and everything like that. So, one or both of us is heavily, dealing in this. Yeah.
I don't have children myself, and when I volunteered for Girls Rock Camp, I was like, who knew inanimate objects was like, it was all like, do you have your water bottle? Do you have your key? Do you have your shoes? Do you have, like, it was like a long.
Yep.
Do you think that you are ready to write the experimental jazz metal kids album that we've all been waiting for? Is it, what do you think?
I hadn't thought about that.
I bet you do a great one.
So I don't know if I'd want to do that, but yeah, okay, so I think the thing, if you think about that, generally what makes a kid's thing, as far as music, I guess, goes, overall it tends to be some kind of combination of melody and rhythm that's fun, that seems fun, or that is interpreted or encoded as fun. So you can do that with that combination of genres. Absolutely. Now, am I going to do it? Probably not. But I did have a dream of having a band with the kids when they got older. So,
Whoa! no.
Yeah, that was like one of those things in the back of my mind. So it'd be great to have the kids in a band. Uh, but yeah, I mean, it's weird though. I wonder. I mean, there's niches for everything, so you never know. Like,
I'm kind of having a hard time imagining what it would sound like. It usually seems like throwing animals in there.
I
Doesn't
mean,
hurt.
I had it. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess like,
Narrative is nice for kids, but even though they seem to think in more impressionistic ways, but they
yeah,
do
you
look.
don't need narrative for kids' music though.
Hmm. Hmm.
I think that is more for the adults. I don't think you need narrative for kids'
Oh,
music.
interesting.
Or let me back up a little. You don't need a story.
Hmm. Hmm.
I think you could use a narrative, but you don't need a story because you go red, 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 ba do 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 do, green, 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 do 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 do, blue. That's not a story at all. But it's a narrative because you covered like what like the colors of the computer. So you know if you do something like that, that goes with whatever. And so yeah, I don't know.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, it's just know it's out there. It's floating out there for you. Do you think there'll be a COVID jazz? Like COVID will have some influence?
Or a
Yeah.
genre.
Yeah,
What was that?
a new genre, a new like a post-COVID.
I'm going to tell you why I don't think that's going to happen.
Okay. Okay.
I think people are so fully invested in the idea of being in person that a lot of these things that have been going on in the last year or so are um they won't go away totally, but they won't be as prominent. So like, live streams, telematic concerts, all the, some of these people making these really well produced videos, and so on in compositions for Zoom,
Yeah.
um, which, I never really, in, I haven't investigated that a whole lot. I don't really think that that is going to be a thing that really, really like is prominent. And I, I could easily be wrong about that, but I think I'm basing that on the fact that everybody who can play a live gig is doing it,
Mhm, mhm.
and they're not streaming them.
I'm just thinking if you are a germ phobe and that has never been a factor in your music, you know, career,
Uh
like
huh.
it would be interesting if someone is like all this time you never knew they were a germ phobe and now they have to,
Oh.
you know what I mean? Like they have to
Hmm.
like get out there again.
Yeah.
Wonder if that, wonder how many people.
I think that's part of why I started doing live streams more now. Weirdly enough, like because
Huh.
while I'm saying that that's not going to be a thing, I kind of wanted, like, I think during the brunt of the pandemic, I just couldn't handle it. But now I'm sort of like, yeah, I could do that, and maybe that could be my little niche.
Mm, mm,
So, maybe people want to see me run my mouth, twice a week or whatever, uh, and so on. So, yeah, I'm still trying to figure a lot of that out. I definitely want to do because it's like I can't really go on tour. I can't go to LA. I can't go to Seattle and all these other places. So it's sort of like, yeah, maybe I should do more of this online stuff.
mm. Start a cult.
Oh, that wouldn't be right.
You're a man who takes the high road. I can tell. Mm.
Sometimes.
So I saw your comment about Napalm Death and how you first heard it. You were like, you thought it was one big song with pauses.
Yeah.
Right, right, right. So I guess it made me think about how do you tell when something's over that you're playing? Do you have any, you know,
Uh,
is it pretty
Cu-
obvious?
various cues,
Hmm.
various cues. It's just a sense, and it's also like I was telling somebody this. It's like I have some ways of making things end if I feel like they're over. But yeah, it's feeling cues and just knowing how the flow of the whole thing is going.
Okay. And is there anything you would like to see as a giant statue?
Ooh,
A trumpet?
no, no, no. I mean, I think anything that could bring or get people something that would inculcate some peaceful attitudes in people. So I guess, although the problem is, you don't want just bland aesthetics. So that's a tough one. I guess something, but anything that would, whatever could maybe motivate someone to, feed the hungry, or just something righteous or something.
Mhm.
I don't mean like in a
What you mean?
overly moralistic kind of judgy way, but I just, something that would uplift someone
Mm,
somehow. So I can't think of a specific thing, and I guess, like, if it did have to be something specific or something, I mean, I like brutalist architecture just because it's from my childhood, in the metro and all that. So I mean, I'd love to just see like a about 4 or 5 rectangles, some squares, just
ah,
like,
ah,
and it looks like a side of a brutalist building or something. That'd be kind of cool. So if we're not gonna be if we're gonna be literal and not metaphorical, it'd be something like that.
you could engineer it. Um,
Yeah.
um, okay. Well, thank you so much for the time. It was so great to hear
Yeah.
you're thinking about how you're thinking about it and what's happening.
Bye bye. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh yeah, my thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Bye.
Au revoir.